Life at the edge of extinction. Near the end, nothing looks dramatic. There is no fire in the sky, no warning, no final roar, no cataclysmic moment signaling the end. Just a world that becomes harder to survive in, year after year, season after season, generation after generation. Each day blends into the next, yet survival grows increasingly fragile. Trees that once towered over herds now struggle to reach sunlight. Rivers that teemed with life shrink unpredictably into stagnant channels. The sounds of insects, birds, and small reptiles become quieter. And everywhere, the great giants of the age, the herbivores, the predators, the flying hunters, feel it in their bones, in their instincts, in the way they move. This is life at the edge of extinction, not as a sudden calamity, but as a slow, inexorable test of endurance, where every choice carries weight and every misstep may be permanent. The last age of the dinosaurs didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a prolonged struggle against an invisible opponent, an opponent that took the form of shifting climates, erratic seasons, and landscapes in constant flux. Forests that once provided cover now retreated to pockets of stability. Coastlines shifted, exposing lowlands to erosion and storm surges. Floodplains became deserts in some regions and stagnant swamps in others. Rivers, once dependable, overflowed in violent floods or dried into trickles during months-long droughts. Food grew unreliable, not because it disappeared entirely, but because it became patchy, inconsistent, and scattered. Plants matured in unexpected cycles, forcing herbivores to wander farther than ever. Insects, small mammals, and early birds moved to track resources. The world was not ending suddenly. It was wearing down. It was thinning. And every creature, from the tiniest mammal to the mightiest Tyrannosaurus rex, felt the strain. Animals adapted as they always had, but adaptation came with unseen costs. Herds migrated farther, often across terrains they had never crossed before. They faced deserts, swollen rivers, and unfamiliar predators. Predators expanded territories in response, pushing into zones where hunting was riskier and prey less predictable. Nesting grounds shifted, sometimes across mountains or into flood-prone areas. But these strategies had trade-offs. Moving farther increased exposure to predators and accidents. Competition over dwindling resources sparked more frequent conflicts within species. Stress increased, slowing growth, reducing fertility, and making juveniles more vulnerable. Fossil evidence from the late Cretaceous hints at this subtle erosion. Populations were smaller, lifespans shorter, and even once common species dwindled. Extinction didn't arrive as a single event. It crept forward quietly, eroding resilience with every passing year, thinning populations and leaving ecosystems precariously unbalanced. Every decision carried immediate and long-term consequences. Should a young hadrosaur drink from a shrinking river, risking ambush by hidden crocodilians or tyrannosaurids, or travel farther, risking dehydration and exhaustion? Should a nest be defended from rival herbivores and predators, or abandoned in search of safer ground that may never be found? For predators, failed hunts became increasingly fatal. See, a single injury that once might have healed now meant starvation or infection. Larger carnivores were forced into more desperate interactions, attacking prey too big, scavenging more aggressively, and taking risks they once avoided. Smaller predators had to innovate or die, scavenging cleverly, hunting cooperatively, or moving across territories never traveled before. This was no longer a world dominated by raw power. It was dominated by trade-offs. The choices made in one instant, where to forage, when to fight, when to flee, could ripple across lifespans and species, creating winners and losers not by strength alone, but by the ability to adapt continuously to a shifting world. Species didn't disappear because they were weak. They disappeared because they were specialized. Evolution, for all its brilliance, works on adaptation to a specific set of circumstances. Dinosaurs built for abundance, for predictable rains, for vast forests and stable wetlands, suddenly found their strategies failing. Armored ceratopsians found fewer safe nesting sites. Large herbivores relying on grasslands discovered pastures that vanished in drought. Predators that specialized in hunting those herbivores had to compete over sparser prey or switched to less familiar prey, increasing failure rates. Populations became fragmented. Small variations that might have been inconsequential before, slightly thinner bones, marginally slower growth, minor shifts in reproductive timing, suddenly became deadly disadvantages. The process was gradual but relentless. Extinction was less about cataclysm than about cumulative pressure, wanting a slow unspooling of ecological stability that made survival increasingly precarious. Long before the asteroid struck, long before the firestorm scorched forests and oceans alike, life was already balancing on a knife's edge. Ecological instability had begun millennia earlier, driven by volcanism, continental drift, and fluctuating climate cycles. Forests fragmented, lakes and rivers fluctuated, and seasonal weather grew unpredictable. Prey species had to constantly evaluate risk, sometimes incorrectly, often at a cost. Predators relied on predictable patterns that no longer existed. Nesting success became a matter of luck. Herbivores that depended on specific plant species found their diets disrupted. Carnivores found their prey disappearing. Behavioral flexibility became as vital as physical strength. And ecosystems, the once buffered against minor changes by redundancy and diversity, became brittle. Each species' fate was entwined with that of many others, creating a precarious chain reaction that spread the consequences of instability across entire continents. In this delicate balance, even small environmental changes could cascade into catastrophic population declines. A few consecutive seasons of poor rainfall could reduce plant growth, weakening herbivore populations. Weakened herbivores would produce fewer offspring, reduce foraging efficiency, and alter migration patterns. Predators dependent on those herbivores would then face scarcity, triggering increased aggression, starvation, and riskier hunting strategies. Disease could spread more easily through stressed populations. Natural selection became a high-stakes gamble. Minor shifts in temperature, vegetation, or river flow, once inconsequential, became life-or-death factors. Each generation faced pressures unlike any before. By the time the asteroid arrived, many species were already struggling to maintain viable populations, and the ecosystems themselves were teetering on the brink. Survival was no longer about adaptation in general. It was about precision adaptation in a collapsing and unpredictable environment. The last morning, before any awareness of the final catastrophe, was a world filled with caution and calculation. Herds paused longer at riverbanks, scanning for threats. Predators hunted less boldly, preferring ambush over pursuit. Eggs hatched in more concealed nests. Young animals stayed closer to parents, and groups moved more slowly, conserving energy. There was no hint of an impending doom, but instinct knew that conditions were changing. Nature's rhythms were fractured. What had once been safe was now hazardous. Rivers could turn lethal, forests could vanish, food could disappear overnight. Life was pressed into making more careful, more calculated choices, and even the smallest mistake, a delay, a misstep, a moment of distraction, could prove fatal. Every organism, from the mightiest ceratopsian to the smallest mammal-like creature, was participating in an invisible test, a game with higher stakes than any generation had ever faced. Extinction does not arrive in a single roar or flash. It is an accumulation of pressures, of failed decisions, of ecological imbalance that compounds over centuries. By the time the asteroid impacted near what we now call Chicxulub, many species were already operating on the edge of viability. Some had fragmented into isolated populations, some had reduced reproductive rates, and others had experienced nutritional stress that made each generation weaker. The impact itself, massive and violent, was only the final punctuation in a sentence life had been writing for millennia. The world's ecosystems did not collapse in an instant. They failed to recover. Plants struggled to photosynthesize, herbivores struggled to feed, predators struggled to survive, and a chain reaction of instability rippled outward. The extinction event amplified what had already been a world in decline, rather than causing it from nothing. One of the most striking aspects of life at the edge of extinction was the silent struggle for water. Rivers and streams no longer flowed predictably. The seasonal rainfall became erratic, sometimes flooding lowlands for weeks, sometimes leaving them completely dry. Herds that had relied on long-established water routes found themselves navigating unfamiliar landscapes, often traveling dangerously long distances in search of dwindling pools. Juveniles lagged behind, weakened by the heat or dehydration. Predators observed from concealed positions, aware that thirst and fatigue made prey more vulnerable. Every step became a test of timing, endurance, and instinct. What was once a simple daily routine, drink, feed, move, now carried the risk of death with every choice. Water, the foundation of life, had become the ultimate arbiter of survival. Food scarcity compounded the pressure. Plants grew slower, fewer in number, and in some regions, entirely disappeared. Large herbivores that once grazed freely now competed over patches of foliage, trampled the same grasses repeatedly, and had to migrate farther to find nutrition. Smaller herbivores faced the same pressure, forced into marginal habitats that were too dangerous or exposed. Carnivores, in turn, faced dwindling prey and increased competition among themselves. The balance of predator and prey, which had once been finely tuned over millions of years, became chaotic. Starvation forced unusual behaviors, scavenging on carcasses long decomposed, attacking unfamiliar species, or leaving the safety of groups to hunt alone. Life had to innovate or perish, and the ecological stress reshaped behavior across every niche. Disease and injury became silent killers in this precarious world. With resources scarce and populations weakened, illnesses spread more easily. Infections that might once have been minor became fatal, and even small injuries, a bite from a rival, a scratch from dense foliage, a broken claw, could prevent an animal from hunting or foraging. Juveniles, the most vulnerable, often perished before reaching maturity, further reducing reproductive success and compounding population declines. The fossil record hints at these subtle pressures. Healed injuries that were far more common than one would expect, signs of malnutrition, and bone pathologies consistent with prolonged stress. Extinction was not the result of a single event. It was written into the bodies of the last survivors, etched in fragile bone and dwindling populations. Finally, social dynamics among species shifted in ways that amplified the threat of collapse. Herding behaviors became both a necessity and a risk. Groups clustered tightly to conserve resources and watch for predators, but larger congregations meant faster depletion of food and water and increased risk of disease transmission. Territorial conflicts became more violent and more frequent. Predators, sensing weakness, exploited these tensions, focusing attacks on the young, sick, or socially isolated. Even species that relied on cooperation, such as pack hunters, faced fractures in their strategies as scarcity forced individuals to prioritize self-preservation over group survival. Across ecosystems, the once predictable rhythms of life, the cycles of birth, growth, predation, and death, had become uncertain, fragile, and dangerous. The world had not yet fallen entirely, but it was straining under pressures unseen by those who would only witness the final catastrophe in the distant future. And so, the last dawn rose not with a dramatic warning, but with a muted, fragile light over forests, rivers, and plains already stretched thin. Animals stirred cautiously, eyes scanning for both predators and scarcity. The wind carried dryness instead of abundance. Water trickled where it once flowed freely. Every movement was measured, every choice consequential. In that fragile calm lay the final lesson. Extinction does not strike like a lightning bolt. It creeps through the cracks of a world weakened by environmental change, by ecological stress, and by the cumulative pressure of countless decisions made under increasingly unforgiving circumstances. And on that morning, life was already testing its limits, unsure if another sunrise would come at all, unaware that this fragile endurance would soon meet an unstoppable force.